Hello everyone, welcome back to A Wild Approach. In today's video, I have what I consider to be a pretty big treat for you guys. If you are like me and you have some new plans for the garden this coming year, then you'll probably want to see this video because it might give you some inspiration and ideas. We're going to be discussing garden design, garden layout, things like that. Specifically, how you lay out your beds, where you put your garden beds, and there's no set rules that I am going to give you. It's more of if you like this, then you might want to do that, that kind of thing. The first thing you want to ask yourself is, what are your goals? What are your garden goals and why? And you may be wondering, well, why do I need to know why? You want to know your why because your why is going to drive every decision you make in the garden if you want to have the least amount of failure. You're going to have failures. You're going to kill plants. That's just a fact of life. That's a fact of gardening. Failing is just part of life, and it's part of the journey. No matter what hobby or job or fun thing you do, you're going to fail at it probably in order to improve. You actually have to fail most of the time in order to improve. So just remember, don't get too down if you kill some plants. This goes back to what I mentioned earlier when I said you can start small. You can start with native annuals. You can start with really easy to grow native plants that are really perfect for your soil and are shorter and just things that are easier to take care of. You can start small and you can start that way and then build on from there. And they're also easier to move around the garden depending on their root system versus woody plants like trees and shrubs. But again, if you already have a pretty big picture idea of what you want your garden to be, it is best to start with the trees and shrubs. But again, it just depends on what you're doing. Getting your feet wet, start small, maybe start with ground covers. And then if you actually know you want to do this and you know you want to build this garden over time, maybe start with those bigger trees and shrubs. Now, if you just want to dip your toe and just kind of get your feet wet in the gardening world and you're not really sure yet if this is the right thing for you, you can start with native annuals. You can put in just a few native annual plants that are good for wildlife, and that can get you a good start. And this depends on where you live. This video is more of an in general video, so if you want to figure out what's native to where you live, you will need to do some extra research on your end to figure out what plants are right for your area. A lot of things that are native over here on the East Coast where I live, well, I don't live on the coast, but I live in Tennessee, and I'm on the eastern side of the United States. And so things that are native over here are not necessarily native over on the west side of the United States. Sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there's not. And so it's really important that you also use a resource that is called BoneApp. BoneApp is a great website to help you figure out exactly how native something is to you and if it's even native to your specific county. It's such a wonderful resource. I recommend it to everyone that lives in the United States. Now, if you're watching this video and you live in a whole other country, obviously this video is going to be less for you because I'm speaking from a perspective of being in the United States, but in general, you can still use some of these techniques to your advantage. The basic general techniques that we discuss in this video when it comes to layout and layering and how to build garden beds. So when it comes to woody host plants, I think that they're great for being keystone species and potentially screening and creating privacy. So there are other host plants that are not woody, for example, but the woody ones really give you a lot of privacy and screening potential. And not only do they give you screening potential and privacy potential, but picking keystone species in particular that are woody is a great way to do things. Woody keystone species are typically some of the most important keystone species, like oaks, willows, and cherries, just for some examples. And it also depends on where you live, so you need to figure out what the keystone species are where you live, and look specifically at the woody keystone species, like your trees and your shrubs, because this will be great for your basic structure of your garden. and the basic layout of your garden. You're going to want to lay a garden around a tree or a shrub or a hedge or a line of trees. What do I mean by this? This is what people call soft landings. So these woody host plants, they host a lot of insects, especially if they are a keystone species within this category. And when, say, an oak has a lot of insects that host on it, these insects oftentimes will need to fall down to the layers below the tree in order to overwinter. So they kind of go down into the leaf litter, into the shrub layer, and the ground cover layer, and they shelter in place, and they overwinter and stay safe down there in that quote-unquote soft landing. So the best way to design your garden is really to design gardens around your already existing trees and shrubs. And if you have a completely clean slate, think about this moving forward. Gradually design your garden to reflect this layering style. So you can probably see why a lot of people say to start with trees and shrubs, because if you start with those structural elements, it is a lot easier to create your garden around them and to build off of them rather than having to add them later. It doesn't mean you can't add them later, it just might take more effort and it might take more destruction of certain plants in your garden in order to do so. So, things you want to ask yourself to get to your why. What's your personality type? This is going to be my top tip in this entire video. And if you don't get anything out of this video, or anything else out of this video, get this out of it, please. Because I think this is really important, and it's probably because I'm an introvert. So that's going to be my first question. And we all kind of actually have a little bit of extroversion and a little bit of introversion in us, typically. But which end of the spectrum are you closer? I am closer to introversion, so I like a lot of alone time. I get overwhelmed when I'm around too many people or for too long. Usually it's the length of time. Like the longer I'm in a social setting, the more rest I need, and I kind of just want to get out of there eventually. I don't want to stay too long, and I want to get home, and I want to be able to rest as much as I can. And if you're an extrovert, you're more likely to get energy from being around people. So you might like big groups of people, and you might have a large friend group. And you might like to be more friendly and talkative to people that you don't know, things like that. I personally think of myself as like a friendly introvert. So like I can be friendly and talkative to people that I have somewhat of an acquaintance with or a friendship with. But if they're strangers to me, I'm more likely to be very introverted and not want to talk to them unless it's a situation where I am trying to make new friends and meet new people and make new acquaintances. So it just really depends on the situation, but for the most part, I'm an introvert and I get more energy by resting and being alone and working in my art studio, for example, or being alone, working in my garden, for example. But there's still moments where I do also get lonely just like anyone else, and I want company. Like I might want company in the garden, I might want company in the art studio. So just because I'm an introvert doesn't mean I don't need to be around people. We all need people, and we all need to socialize. This is just the natural part of how we work. But the reason that this question is coming to the kind of near the beginning of the video, sort of, is because I want to know if you are closer to being an introvert or closer to being an extrovert, because in my opinion, it will affect your garden design. All too many times I see people having problems in their garden, including myself, and it usually has something to do with their personality. So for me, since I'm introverted, I really like my garden to feel enclosed. I like it to feel like a garden room or a series of garden rooms, and I like it to feel private. I like it to feel enclosed, almost like enveloping me in its beauty. I don't know how else to describe it, but I like hedges, I like screening, I like evergreens, and my entire garden is not evergreens, far from it, but I do find that evergreens are important for me just because I do like to have year-round enclosure, even if it's less enclosure than it is in the summer, because it is. I mean, let's face facts. The more layers you have, the more enclosure and screening you have. And in summer, that's when you've got your most leaves and your most leaf cover and your most screening. So you've got those layers. But even in the winter, I want to have a little bit of privacy. And so I really value native evergreens. Now, if you're an extrovert, you actually might feel the opposite. And you might not, and that's okay too. But figure out how you feel when you're in your garden. Do you actually value screening and privacy, or do you actually want to open your garden up to your neighbors and you want to have people actually talk to you when you're working in your garden? Do you want just any neighbor that drives by or walks by to be able to see what you're up to and to talk to you and say hi? Or are you a little bit more reserved and you want to kind of just do your own thing when you're out there and concentrate on what you're working on? Because just because you're an extrovert, it might not mean you want an extroverted garden. But you still want to know kind of what your personality is like when it comes to your garden and how you feel in your garden and what kind of garden you want to have. Do you want a more introverted garden or do you want a more extroverted garden? So some examples of an extroverted garden might be, instead of having that enclosed garden room effect, completely, maybe you have areas that are more open and you have areas that are more seen from the street. So maybe you have a path that goes from your front door to the road straight in the middle of your garden, and that way people can actually come up the middle of your garden all the way to your house, and they can actually freely move back and forth, and there's no fence or gate blocking them, and it's just an open space, and then the gardens are kind of more on the sides. This would be a more, in my opinion, extroverted garden, because they can see all the way up to your house from the street. There's not really a lot of screening happening in that middle area, and you can work in your garden and you can see each other. Your neighbors can see you, you can see them completely. And there's big, wide open spaces. Maybe the garden beds are actually smaller because you don't need as much screening. So that's something I want you to keep in mind throughout this video, because every single garden layout that I'm going to show you in this video has a different purpose and a different personality to it. Some of these garden layouts are going to be a lot more introverted focused, and some of these layouts are going to be more extrovert focused. And again, just because you're an introvert or an extrovert doesn't mean that's how your garden is laid out, but it could go hand in hand. And I'm mostly basing that off of how I feel. I feel to be a very introverted person, and I also like my garden to reflect that, because that's just my comfort zone. Your comfort zone may not match with your personality. It just depends on what you feel. So take that in mind as we go throughout this video. So first up is a garden more like mine, where it is very much enclosed and has a lot of screening. This garden is sort of a bottleneck style. You have thick, deep beds, one on the left, one on the right, and a very skinny little area where you could have a gate or an opening in the beds so that people can come up into the garden from the street. But it is a very tiny little area so that you know exactly where people are coming in and out. So this, to me, is still sort of an introverted garden, but yet you're keeping your gate or your opening to your garden in the center, and you're putting it at the base near the street. So to me, an introvert or an extrovert could probably like this one. I personally like this one as long as there's a gate, because I still want that enclosure. So even if the opening is tiny and in the front, in the middle, I still want to have a gate so that I can close it off and just feel completely shut in there. So the next one is more of just a really wide walkway in the center of two large, deep beds. This garden, I feel, could fit either side of the spectrum, but is probably more geared toward extroverts, just because that center wide walkway is perfect for lots of company coming over and coming straight to your door from your neighborhood. Uninvited guests are probably more likely to be up an extrovert's alley than an introvert's alley, so I'd still consider this more of an extroverted garden, even though it has deep beds. This next one is sort of an X-shape design. No rhyme or reason for it. I'm just trying to show you a ton of different design ideas. And this gives you 4 garden beds, 2 large ones and 2 smaller ones. And it gives you 2 walkways from the street and 2 walkways from the house. And they all converge into the center where you could have a seating area, or you could have a gazebo, or you could have nothing there and just have lawn. Now, I consider this an extroverted garden, and I think it's funny that it's an X shape because I think that that fits perfectly, because you can have 2 walkways from the street, which means you can have lots of company come over really easily into your garden, hanging out with you in your garden, and people seeing more into your garden. But it has a little bit of an introverted twist because the beds, the way that they're shaped, it creates a little bit of a bottleneck up at the top near the patio. And so you could get a little bit of screening and a little bit of privacy, especially because that small bed at the bottom near the road gives additional screening. And since the pathways are not straight and they're more of a diagonal to create the X, again, this could work for an introvert as well. And so if you had a gate at each opening down near the road, it would be perfect for an introvert, in my opinion. This garden style is another favorite of mine, and it's very similar to what I currently have in my garden. It is a large, deep bed on the bottom left quadrant that continues all the way to the right side, which in my garden is toward the east. And it has open space in the middle, and then it has another bed that's smaller near the walkway and near the gate. And it has an opening toward the driveway so that you can walk from your driveway into the garden, and you can walk all the way up to your patio. Now, this is not exactly how mine's currently laid out, but this is very similar to how it's laid out. And so I really like this one. I think that since I'm an introvert, though, I would have a gate there near the driveway so that people couldn't just walk into the garden. Just easily walking in, they'd have to get my permission because they'd have to be able to open the gate, and it would have a lock on it on my side. That's just how I am as an introvert, but an extrovert could just leave that open. That way their neighbors can just walk right in, and they could just hang out in the garden whenever. This next one is pretty simple, but also pretty introverted. This is a completely enclosed garden, and it has sort of an oval shape in the middle so that you are completely surrounded by plants on pretty much every side except for your path to your side garden, which would lead you to your backyard, and your path to your patio. Everything else is planted up. Everything else has thick hedges or screening plants like trees and evergreens, things like that. And so to me, this is definitely an introvert garden. And if you're an extrovert, you may also like this if you are more introverted when it comes to when you're outside in your garden. But if you're an extrovert through and through in every way, you probably wouldn't love this design as much because it makes you feel more isolated from the rest of your neighborhood. This next garden is, to me, good for pretty much anyone. It's a very basic, simple garden design, and it's 2 main beds, one very large, deep, lush bed, and then a more medium-sized bed near the house. The lush, deep bed is flanking the road, so this is going to give you a lot of privacy and a lot of screening in a pretty simple way. And so I think this is great for introverts and extroverts alike, but especially introverts. And you also have that other bed at the house, so if you're on a hill like I am, this would give you layers of screening, which is great for that privacy factor. But it also has an opening near the driveway so that you can either have a gate there and make it more enclosed, like I would prefer, or if you're more extroverted, you could probably have that open if you like that better. And that way you can just freely move in and out of your garden from your driveway or from your patio area. Pretty simple. This next one is, in my opinion, just beautiful in general. It's a little bit quirky, but remember to keep those edges curvy enough that it, looks more natural, but at the same time, don't make them so annoying to mow around. With all these designs, you want to keep in mind the mowing part of it. In most of these designs, they're meant to have some sort of lawn in there, and that's just the way that I do things. My lawn is my path, and my path is my lawn. And so keep in mind that the areas not drawn in with the bright green is considered lawn areas. And so if you're going to have to mow that, then you're going to want your lines to be easy to mow. So just keep that in mind. So when I'm drawing these little squiggles, just keep in mind that it's not an exact science. It's more of just an idea of what you could do. And depending on what kind of design you want, I like the more natural, wild, and loose design type, and I'm less of a formal type of person, so I like the more curves and the more mystery when it comes to like the pathways. So I love this one for that reason, and it has 4 beds. It has one long and skinny bed, one kind of thick center bed, and then 2 smaller beds up near the house. This gives you a pathway from your kind of near your front door, a pathway near your patio and your side garden, and a path or 2 toward your driveway. And I think what makes this one fun is you can walk around that island bed and really feel like you're walking for a while, even in a small space, because you can take in all these plants at different moments. And I think it kind of makes you feel like you have multiple garden rooms in one space. Next one is pretty simple, and I really love it because it's definitely enclosed, definitely private, and you just get all the screening you could probably get in this small of a space, without just completely not having anywhere to sit or stand, you know. You still have plenty of areas to sit and hang out, maybe have a gazebo or a table or a greenhouse, but you still have thick beds. So with this one, you would have multiple beds, but they all connect to create one large, deep bed. And they create sort of a peninsula shape in the middle where you could have your lawn. And I really love this one for the fact that it gives you that garden room effect, but your whole entire front yard is one garden room. So I really like this one. It's not the one that I have, but it has some similarities to my design. This next one is fun, in my opinion, for everyone, but I think that it fits an extrovert a little bit better because it has multiple openings and it has larger open space near the in my case, the west side or the left side of the screen here. And so you have one big open path on the left, and then you have a smaller path toward the driveway, so multiple points of entry. I wouldn't want this because I would want to feel a little bit safer, private, and enclosed, but I think it's still nice, and I think it could still be enjoyable by both types of personalities. You've got 2 smaller beds in the side yard. You have an island bed that attaches to your patio, and then you have a corner bed where your driveway and your pathway meet near your front door, and then you have a larger bed near the street. So that larger bed near the street is going to give you the bulk of your privacy. And then the corner bed near your house is going to give you some privacy on that side. So you can still get privacy, but it's a little bit more open. This garden design is, in my opinion, more formal and more fun and cute and quirky when it comes to the spectrum of designs. And so this is a nice combo of formal yet quirky because you get that heart shape in the middle and then you get those triangular beds on the corners. And I definitely feel like this is more of an extrovert garden because you can talk about the heart shape, you can talk about what your garden looks like from the air, but you also have multiple points of entry and not as much screening. Now you still get screening because your beds are kind of diagonal from each other, but these openings and all of this pathway space and the formality of it just, to me, screams more of an extroverted garden. This next garden design is very similar to the last one, except instead of a heart shape, we have a star shape. And instead of just a couple openings, we have more openings. So more openings, in my opinion, means more extroverted. And it's still more of a formal design because it has very rigid beds and very rigid shapes. And it has that star design, which to me is more of a formal thing when you start to get into these specific shapes that are in these rigid lines. And this is going to be more annoying to mow, in my opinion, so this is higher maintenance. But it is kind of a cute, quirky design meant for more extroverted people. This next garden design, in my opinion, is also an extroverted garden because it has big, wide openings and pathways straight from the street and driveway to the house. So your neighbors can easily just walk right up and say hi, talk to you, hang out for a bit on your patio, and you can enjoy the garden together. And so you have 3 garden beds. One's really, really thick, one's longer and skinny, and then you have a smaller bed in the corner near the front door. This is a cool design in my opinion, even though it's not really my kind of garden design. I think if I were to visit somebody with a garden design like this, I would like it. I would enjoy walking through it and looking through their garden. This garden design is a little bit different. It's probably one of the easier ones to mow. Like I said, the lawn areas are the areas that are not drawn with the bright green. They're the areas we didn't draw on. So those areas being mowed in this one seems pretty easy. You come in from your backyard, you mow down to the road, and then you come back and you go to the right and you mow in this circle, and then you go back out. And that's pretty much it. This is a pretty simple design. I think it is introvert and extrovert friendly. You can have a gate down there at the bottom where it meets the road, where the path goes to the road. And then you have this completely enclosed space in the circle that gives you the feeling of privacy, if you're planting tall enough plants in your beds. Now, the bed is kind of skinny and scrawny, and so you have to think about what you're planting a little bit more. You don't have as much room to plant thicker, wider plants. So you kind of need to utilize skinnier plants. So keep that in mind with this garden design, but it also depends on how big of a yard you have. My entire yard is 1/4 of an acre, so my front yard is not even 1/4 of an acre. So for me, I would have to plant really skinny things, and I do. I have skinny evergreens planted. So something to keep in mind depending on how much space you have. This next design is probably like my least favorite design, but this is the most formal design I think I have in this video. This is a set of 5 garden beds, and they are squares or rectangles, and they're very rigid. They're probably annoying to mow around and weed eat around, and they leave a lot of open space, so your neighbors can easily see all the way up to your patio actually from the street, and all the way to your front door from the street. And this is a very open design, perfect for extroverts, perfect for people who like formal gardens and they like rigid hedges or rigid plantings. Definitely the opposite of my style, but I wanted to include it because I want to include a vast array of design ideas for you guys. This next garden is an extrovert's dream, in my opinion, especially those people who are also extroverted out in the garden, and they want everyone to see everything they're doing. And the reason I say that is because if you look at this garden, it is shaped in such a way that the viewer's eyes go straight toward the house and straight toward the middle of the garden where you're probably at. And you can be seen on your patio from the street, you can be seen on your main path from the street, in the middle of your garden from the street, and the way that it's shaped, all eyes are on you. So if you really feel like an extrovert in every way, including your garden, this is probably the garden design for you. And it's super simple because it's just 2 medium to large size triangular beds, and the rest is just lawn. Now, this garden design is not as good for wildlife because the more lawn you have, the less garden beds you have, the less it is helping the wildlife. But if you choose keystone species and you choose really good ground covers and soft landing plants, you might actually be able to help the wildlife more than you would expect. But it's not really up my alley, but I thought some of you might enjoy this one. It's also more of a formal design because of those triangular shaped beds, but you could make this more loose by adding more curves to it, by switching up what kind of plants you have and having less of the same plants and having more variety and diversity in your garden. And remember, diversity in your garden is also really good for wildlife. I have another formal design for you. This one I feel could fit almost any personality. But I think it is more geared toward an extrovert that loves formal design because we have a perfect circle in the middle. We have two, I don't know, what would you call those? Trapezoids? I don't know what else to call them. They're like trapezoids with curves. Anyway, and then a bottom trapezoid there. And so there's two main openings to this garden from the street. So if you're an introvert, you would definitely want to have gates or some other screening, maybe some trellises, I don't know, down there if you wanted to enclose that. But if not, then you're probably more of an extrovert. And so people could come in, hang out in your garden in that center area or on your patio, and they can probably see most of your garden from the street depending on what angle they're at, but you do get a little bit of privacy with that little trapezoid bed down there at the road. And of course, the thicker beds on the sides will give you more privacy from your neighbors next door. Wow, this garden design, I don't know how to feel because when I drew this one, on the one hand, I really, really like it, and on the other hand, I just don't know how practical it is. I think when it comes to the areas near the street and near the driveway, you have plenty of depth of garden bed that you can put your trees and your shrubs and all the things in between. But as the spiral goes toward the center, you're probably having to plant more shorter plants, more ground cover type plants, and you're probably not getting as much screening as you go toward the center of that spiral. So I don't know about this design. I think that in my garden it wouldn't really work because my garden's just so small, but in a large garden I think this would be so cool because it would give you almost a maze feeling, like you're entering a maze and you're going to the center, and then you'd have to come back out that same way because it's like one spiral path among one spiral garden bed. So I love it in theory, but not for my small garden. If I had a huge plot of land, I think it would be so fun to try to do something like this, but it's going to be a challenge no matter what the scale is. But I think it's a fun idea, and I think it's definitely more of an introvert garden because you can have some decent screening in this garden. I think where you're going to lose a little bit of screening potential is in the very middle of the bottom near the street. You can see how thin and skinny even the thickest bed is right there, but I think you could maybe make up for it in the middle of the spiral or the halfway point into the spiral, those areas, because you could add some tall and skinny evergreens or some trellising with vines, so you could still get some privacy and still get some screening. You're just not going to have you're not going to have as much room for thick plants in that center area, if that makes sense. This next garden I actually kind of like because even though it's more formal, it has potential to have lots of privacy, screening, and enclosure options. So you basically have 3 C's. You have one C that is facing the correct way, and then 2 backwards C's, and then you only have one actual opening, and it's kind of skinny and it's near the road. So you could put a gate there and make it more of an introvert dream. And I think what I love about this one is the way that the left C and the center C connect. There's an opening in the smaller C, and you could create a really fun and cute seating area here. You could you could put like a swing, like an adult bench swing, and you could put like trellising and vines, and you can make it really pretty, or you can even do it more of a kid's garden right there and give them more of like a kid's playground type effect. And that could give you a lot of privacy too in that spot. So you could put like patio tables and chairs there, depending on what kind of like situation you're dealing with. I'm on a hill, so I would have to dig a flat spot to create something like that. But there are a lot of options. And so I really love this little C within the larger C's effect because you get these little areas where you get some privacy. But you don't have the winding paths. You don't have as much garden mystery, so this isn't like my favorite design, but it is pretty cute. Okay, guys, so this design is similar to my design, but has some big differences, and it's similar to other designs we've shown earlier in the video, but again has some differences. So one main thing of this design is that it has a thick, large bed in the bottom right corner that takes up the bulk of the space of the garden. And diagonal from that is a corner bed that is much smaller, and together they create almost like a stomach shape. I know that sounds weird and it's kind of grotesque, but if you look, the top part kind of looks like an esophagus coming down to a stomach, and then the stomach is about to be intestines on the left side there. Now, I know that sounds weird and kind of gross, but think of it more like this. That quote-unquote stomach area is actually just a perfect little enclosed private oasis, because the bed on the bottom right quadrant is so large that you can plant trees, shrubs, you can plant evergreens and deciduous things all mixed together and get a pretty good privacy screening, especially if you add some trellises and vines on top of that. Now, one thing about this garden is there is an opening at the road all the way down in the bottom left, but I think what's great about this is an introvert could put a gate there and still feel completely private. And it would feel so private just because even if somebody walks into that gate, they have to wind through the paths to even find you. Like, it's sort of a maze, because you also have these small beds on the left side in the side garden, and that gives even more of a sense of mystery and a sense of destination, which is something I really love about gardening. All right, this next garden design could fit almost anyone. It's not really my cup of tea, but I think it's more for the kind of people who like a little bit of formality, but they still like a little bit of quirkiness. Because this one has 3 really skinny little openings, 1 at the driveway side and 2 at the street, but you still get some screening and some privacy because you have multiple garden beds, and you even have a center island bed. So this can give you that sense of mystery going around the corner, going around the curves, but still give you a little bit of room to be an extrovert and invite people into your garden from the street. Next one is definitely more geared toward the extroverts. This is almost like an upside down tornado shape when it comes to the lawn area, and then the garden beds are just 2 decently sized garden beds. One's very large and one's kind of more medium sized. And these garden beds they look like they could be pretty thick and they could give you some great screening. But with this layout, you have like this big opening near the street so that people can see perfectly all the way to your patio. And they can't really necessarily see to your front door as well, but they can see to your patio, which is probably where you're going to be sitting at the most anyway. So you can invite your friends over really easily from across the street. You can say hi, and you can have a great time with your friends coming into this garden and like hang out with you. But what I don't really like about this garden is there's not a lot of mystery to it. There's not a destination other than the patio, of course. And you can see the patio from the street, so it's not really hidden or tucked away, so there's not really any mystery or anything to figure out. It's just, boom, there it is. And that's just not really up my alley. But I think this would be great for someone who loves to have friends over and loves to invite their neighbors over. Same thing with this one. It's basically the same design, just reverse, and it's less of a tornado shape for lawn. And it's really got an even smaller bed in the corner, and I think you can see the front door from the street a little bit easier, as well as the patio. So this is even wider of a path, it looks like to me, where the lawn is. And so this is even more of an extroverted garden in my opinion, because people can see even further into the garden. They can even see kind of into your side yard from the street. So that's something to think about. This is definitely more of an extroverted garden design. And this next garden design is really cool because you get one really large deep bed and then you get a smaller bed. And what's great about this is with that deep bed, you have all this room to plant tall trees or medium-sized trees and smaller shrubs, and in general a hedge or a mix between a hedge and some trees with ground covers and medium-sized perennials in between. So you have a lot of space in that bed and a lot of room for privacy and screening. And in the smaller bed, it gives you another garden layer between that other bed and your house. So this is going to screen your patio decently, and it's going to screen your main path really well. And it's going to give you a little bit more of a sense of mystery because you have this path in the center, and you can kind of see what you have around the corner, and it kind of feels more like a destination. But, you know, it's not full of mystery. It's a little bit more straightforward, so it isn't my favorite design, but I do love how deep the bigger garden bed is. So I would say this one is more of an introvert garden, but an extrovert could also use it because, as you can see, the path kind of connects the side garden to the driveway. And so in a way, you're opening yourself up to your neighbors next to you, but you're not opening yourself up to strangers on the street or anyone across the street. So it's still more introverted, but with a little bit of a friendly twist to it. This garden design is, again, more of an extroverted garden, but it has a little bit of introversion sprinkled in. So the introversion part of it is the fact that the beds are thick, so you can have a lot of garden screening, a lot of plants, if you choose to do so. And the more extroverted side of it is it has a wide path right near the street going all the way to the front door. So you can invite your friends over, similar to a couple other designs we saw earlier. And, it really depends. Like, is this what you enjoy? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, this design is similar to the last one with a little bit of a twist. The garden bed on the left is much smaller than the garden bed on the right. The garden bed on the right is really thick. You could have a lot of screening, but there's a pretty wide path to the street, and that wide path can pretty much see the entire front of your house, all the way from the patio to the front door. So this garden design, in my opinion, is more extrovert friendly. It also has a path that goes to the side yard that's pretty wide. So it's pretty efficient when it comes to mowing, when it comes to utilizing your tools and your like garden wheelbarrow, things like that. Pretty easy to like maintain and like move through it. But it's more of an extroverted garden space just because people can see pretty much your entire house. Because there's just no landscaping up against the front of your house. And the final garden design I have for you guys today is, in my opinion, more of an extroverted twist on an introvert design. So I do think this leans more toward extroverts, but I think introverts could do this design too. It's just not my style. And it's not my style because there's not enough of a barrier between me and the street, especially down there at the street. So for this one, you have 3 garden beds. You have 2 medium to large size beds and then 1 kind of smaller / medium peninsula bed or island bed in the middle. Now I said peninsula or island bed because it connects to the patio and main path. And since it does so, it kind of feels more like a peninsula when in fact it's really more of an island bed. So one cool thing about this design is it has a path that can lead you from your side garden down to the street, and from the street up to the main path toward your front door. And so you have a little bit of a destination and a journey. You have a little bit of garden mystery, but not a ton. And so it kind of has some introverted feels in it, but I think it's mostly an extroverted garden because that bottom path to the street is just so wide. It's so open. People can see quite a bit of that front area, but you do get a little bit of privacy and a little bit of screening from that island bed in the middle, because if you notice the way it's positioned, it's going to give your patio a little bit of privacy. But it also just depends on what angle people are standing at. Depending on where they're standing, they might actually see your patio, and at other angles, they won't see your patio. So it gives you a little bit of privacy, but a little bit of openness. So maybe this is one of the more best garden designs for in-between people. People who kind of want people to come over, but kind of want some privacy sometimes, and maybe they want options. And you can modify this design to fit those parameters. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stickers, paintings, and collector boxes. Available now at macylu.com. Thanks for supporting the channel and the wildlife habitat we create. To support the channel, like the video, comment, and subscribe. You can also support my work by buying art from me at macylu.com. Thanks for watching!